The deteriorating political and economic situation in Hong Kong highlights the need to move assets from Hong Kong to safer jurisdictions internationally and to own gold in the safest way possible, and indeed in a safe way, which is segregated, actionable, flexible, and always with an eye on the expense.
Hong Kong is a situation that everyone's watching right now, and we're going to discuss how owning gold in the correct way really empowers the investors and allows you to adapt to a changing situation.
Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Goldonomics podcast, where we're looking at global financial markets through the lens of precious metals. And I'm joined again today by CEO of GoldCore, Stephen Flood, and Director of Research, Marco Byrne. And our title of our podcast today is Hong Kong Instability Highlights the Need for Physical Gold. But before we get into that, I just want to remind everybody to subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, on SoundCloud, and on YouTube. Hit the notification bell on YouTube so you can be notified every time that we upload a new video or a new podcast. But now to our topic of the day, which is Hong Kong Instability Highlights the Need for Physical Gold. And first of all, Mark, if I can actually ask you, maybe you just give me a very brief synopsis of what really is actually going on in Hong Kong at this moment in time.
Yeah, well, it's something we've been monitoring for a long period of time over recent months, and unfortunately, it's just gotten worse and worse in recent weeks and indeed in recent days. And it's getting more violent, more unstable, and the situation is just more and more uncertain by the day, both politically, economically, and financially. So the protests.
And what's at the heart of the matter?
The heart of the matter is I suppose they want freedom. The people of Hong Kong want freedom, and the Chinese government is increasingly flexing their muscles and basically trying to assert control over the government of Hong Kong, and so it's about democracy ultimately, and we're seeing that all over the world. There's these movements that people are they want freedom, they want more, I suppose, control over their affairs and not to be dictated to by large superpower federal governments around the world, or indeed supranational governments such as the EU, IMF, and all these very large, powerful global bodies or institutions. So fundamentally, it's about democracy, and it's deteriorated in a huge way, and it's got to a stage now where it's getting very violent. The protesters were shot last week. An elderly man died. I think in the last 24 hours he was hit with a brick. So and basically the protests that were seen to be on the periphery and a minority of people, there seems to be more people protesting, and it's now spread. It used to be on the periphery of the city of Hong Kong, and now it's spread into the central business district, the financial district, and it's just very, very unstable indeed. And basically, it's so bad that we've taken the unprecedented decision to actually advise our clients to move their gold out of Hong Kong because of the scale and the nature of this violent protest. A top police official warned just this week that the words he used was that Hong Kong society had been pushed to the brink of total breakdown. So this is very, very serious, and the ramifications are actually just this morning. It's breaking news that Hong Kong has actually gone into a recession for the first recession for a decade. So, the political uncertainty is now creating the financial and economic risks. The economy shrank by 3.2% from July to September compared to the previous quarter. This is just released economic data overnight. So there's a potential for a crackdown by the Chinese government, and that would compromise the mobility and indeed the liquidity of assets in Hong Kong. There's speculation, and we have this from very informed clients of ours as well. We have interesting conversations, speculation about capital controls, currency controls, potentially in the coming weeks and months. So basically the situation has deteriorated, and it's not going to improve anytime soon. So right. It's very, very worrying indeed.
All right, Steve, now we've discussed before the concept of SAFE in one of our more recent podcasts. Maybe you talk to that for a minute, but also talk about how this all ties back to the idea of the importance of holding gold physically as well.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible situation in Hong Kong, and everyone here at GoldCore are wishing the people of Hong Kong, the very best for the future, and we hope that they will resolve their differences, and calmer minds and heads will come to bear. It's a very serious situation, and it's Hong Kong is an enormous financial center in the world. It's where East meets West, incredibly stable, very entrepreneurial, an amazing place for commerce as well, and people who live there and work there love it, and visitors love it too. So it's a very serious situation, but it really underlines what's happening in the world today, and the importance for having insurance in one's portfolio. There's a worrisome thing happening these days where people will tend to fob off responsibility for their financial futures and their pensions. They buy ETFs, they buy exchange traded funds, passive funds, and they give it to a financial advisor, and they don't actually look at what's in these investment plans. They need to start being active, and the reason is because risk exists. Risk happens. There's a term called black swans you may not be familiar with, but basically what it means is it's a statistically rare event, can happen, does happen, and can have a very massive impact on one's portfolio should it happen to you. So when you're putting together a portfolio, you need to understand what risks you're trying to you accept as an individual, and what you should do about them. So in our view, the global financial world is very much underpinned by massive amounts of debt and a lot of imbalances that exist out there. And you're going to have flashpoints, you're going to have crises that come and go. We think Hong Kong has all the makings of a major crisis. When you accept that there is risk, then you need to figure out what sort of insurance you need to have in your portfolio. We believe that gold is a critical component of a diversified portfolio. You need to have anywhere from 3 to 10, maybe even more, maybe up to 20% of your portfolio in something like precious metals. And you should research why that is important, mainly because it's something that can't be printed and can't be watered down by the authorities. So it gives you personal sovereignty. But once you have gold, you need to hold it in the right way. So segregated, allocated gold is very important. In GoldCore here, we have GoldCore Secure Storage, which allows people to invest and hold gold all around the world. So Zurich is a very popular location. London's a popular location, Dublin, but also Hong Kong and Singapore. And as guardians to that secure storage program, we would be looking at those risks that are developing. And so in the last few days, we've been obviously analyzing the situation in Hong Kong, and we've taken the view that we need to advise people to perhaps move their gold from Hong Kong to another Asian location, and that to us will be Singapore. So we've taken the steps to actually move gold from Hong Kong to Singapore. We've gone out to our clients, we've consulted with them, discussed this matter with them, and all the almost universal acceptance that this is probably the best thing to do in this situation. And with a view, though, that when things calm down, that gold will flow back to Hong Kong when it becomes slightly more stable. So once you have that gold in your portfolio, you have it diversified in multiple locations, you need to then be vigilant. And I suppose that's the point. Having contact with our clients this week, talking to them, discussing the matters with them, and communicating with them and taking action, that vigilance then translates into a dynamic plan, a dynamic investment plan to hedge that risk. And so when we take those steps with our clients, we do so in order to rebalance that portfolio. The Hong Kong as a case study is important because many investors actually in Hong Kong and other places in the world will invest primarily in things like ETFs. And what one must need to remember is when you have an ETF, you have an excellent way of getting an allocation to gold. You can use it for speculation, which we think is the best way to use ETFs. But when you own it for insurance purposes, it can fall down. It would be difficult for someone who owns an ETF to call that ETF provider and have that allocation that might be in somewhere like Hong Kong and move it to another location. So that's why physical gold that's segregated, allocated with a partner like GoldCore allows you to be vigilant and also dynamic. And we call that optionality, that the ability to step in and actually move your ounces of gold and silver to a different jurisdiction.
Right. Okay. And when we talked about the acronym before, SAFE, S-A-F-E, that was segregated, it was actionable, it was flexible, and then there was the kind of whole thing about the efficiency of expenses. Maybe Mark, you talk to that for a moment, because that's the benefit then of physical segregated gold over and above the ETFs in this type of situation, whereby you know, we've got some civil unrest in a particular jurisdiction, which would be a popular place for storing gold, whether that's physical gold or whether that's the gold held on behalf of ETFs. And talk to me then about this, because now we're really getting to the heart of the matter, because now that flexibility allows those physical gold holders to actually do something about that. It allows the owner to be massively proactive because they hold the gold segregated, allocated in physical format, so they can actually do something about that and move that around jurisdictionally.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the great advantages of gold, as seen throughout history. It's that portability is the word that's used, you know, and portability basically means it's movable, it's accessible, and that confers optionality is a word that Stephen has used. You know, it gives you these options that you don't have with ETF, exchange traded funds, which basically give you exposure to the gold price. You don't own the underlying physical asset. It's a form of uninsured gold, and they have indemnified themselves from many of the risks that we actually see in Hong Kong today in terms of civil unrest and all the rest. These exchange traded funds are totally indemnified themselves from these risks, you know. So yeah, it's you know, that by having actually fully, it's the nature of ownership is the key, and also the jurisdiction that the gold is in. There's two things there. So if you own fully segregated, so you own the underlying physical assets in your name, coins or bars, fully segregated from other clients, then in these worst case scenarios, you can quickly move to take delivery of your gold or move them to a different jurisdiction very, very quickly. And that's what we're doing on behalf of our clients right now. You cannot do that with an exchange traded fund. You cannot do that with many forms of digital gold, you know. So it's unprecedented. It was funny, I had a very interesting wealthy client in during the week. He's a client of ours going back a long time, since before the last financial crisis, and he said, I'm just shocked by what's happened in Hong Kong. You know, I knew that there was always this risk with China, but I never realized it would get this bad and get this bad this soon. I thought they'd muddle through type of thing, and they'd always patch things along, and Hong Kong would remain one of the centers of capitalism in the world. And who knows, it probably will, but there's real risk there. And this is a as he called it, a bastion of capitalism. He said, and he said, you see what's happening in London today with Brexit, and the uncertainty that's impacting London as a financial center. These are two bastions of capitalism, of global capitalism today, that are under huge pressure, you know, and that very much underlines the point whereby you need to be mindful of where you hold your gold, what jurisdictions. And we've long talked about owning gold in the safest place possible, both in the safest countries in the world, the safest jurisdictions in the world, but also the underlying legal ownership of the gold that confers all the benefits we talked about in that SAFE acronym, Safe Gold, that we covered in the podcast. I think it was episode 12 podcast. So it's, as you said, segregated, actionable, flexible, and expenses as well, you know, because a lot of people, when they go to sell their gold now in Hong Kong, they're going to find out that there's a lot of hidden charges, both to sell sometimes and also to move that gold. They'll find it can be very expensive, whereas we're actually acting on behalf of our clients.
From a liquidity point of view as well, liquidity may not be as liquid now, trying to trade gold in Hong Kong as it might be in other jurisdictions. Exactly,
it's not, and that the deteriorating liquidity that's seen there is actually impacting the premiums. So who knows? That's a real risk. So if someone goes to sell their gold in Hong Kong, if they don't take action now, and then they go to sell their gold in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months in Hong Kong, they may be told, sorry, you can only sell your gold coins and gold bars at 10% below spot in a worst case scenario, you know. So that's a risk. And then the other risk is the safety assets. To be honest, we're just erring on the side of caution here. We think it's important to be proactive and just, you know, I don't think there's any real risk that I know in the short term there's no risk whatsoever to the assets. There's no one is saying that the Chinese government or indeed the Hong Kong government is going to nationalize gold bullion assets held in vaults in Hong Kong. That's not a real risk in the short term. Who knows? It may well be in the medium and long term, but the bigger risk is the liquidity and the pricing and the premiums, you know, and that. So we have the ability to help our clients in that regard. Whereas, as I said, if you have digital gold or ETF gold, you could find yourself quite exposed.
Steve, what would you advise then somebody now, a holder of either digital gold or ETF gold at this moment in time, that may be potentially exposed to Hong Kong unrest?
Well, I would definitely contact your provider and ask for your metal to see what your options are. You know, you may be able to sell it there and then buy it somewhere else. But I do think you probably need to revisit the very reasons why you own gold and to consider that optionality that we spoke about there, that portability. It is actually critical. And I think in the world that we expect to come, you know, with the amount of debt out there, you're going to find more Hong Kong-like situations occurring. And I think it's very, very important. So I'd say contact them, find out what your options are. Always seek to diversify. Always hold physical. Even though it costs a little bit more, you get so much more for your money. You get those rights. Your gold in an ETF is not insured. The trustee does not insure gold in most ETFs out there. That's actually an enormous concern. What does that mean? It means that you have very little rights, you have very little recourse. You have a great system that you can trade very, very easily, but you know you get what you pay for, and that's the problem with ETFs. They're not really fit for purpose in extreme circumstance. Physical gold in location, in a safe location outside of the banking system, and that's very important. Is key, and that's what gold does. It actually turns up. It becomes that friend of yours when you need it the most. So I'd say, yeah, contact them, seek to move it. I also have an issue with anybody who has pooled gold. A lot of digital gold providers might have pooled gold out there. They're very inflexible in terms of what you can do and the costs that are associated with moving your gold outside of one vault to another vault. So, yeah, I would get on the phone and see what your options are.
So ultimately, what you're saying is, if you're going to be holding gold as insurance in your portfolio, it has to potentially reduce risk, not add further risk to it. Yeah. And what's going on in Hong Kong at the moment, that instability really is highlighting that fact and highlighting the need for gold in a physical way, and safe gold, as we've said before, segregated, actionable, flexible, and with an eye to the efficiency of the expenses if you need to do anything about that. And that can either be from moving it or in terms of the costs when selling it or liquidating it.
Yeah.
Okay, gents, this has been shorter than our normal podcast, but really I think what you wanted to do was highlight this issue that's going on and demonstrate the power when it comes to holding gold physically in that segregated format, that it helps you actually to avoid what are now can be demonstrated as being real risks.
Absolutely.
Happening in real time at this moment in time, and it just really highlights that need. Okay, gents, Steve?
It does, and just one last thing.
Sure.
But by doing this, it's funny, a lot of the clients now already, there's a sense of relief because they're looking at this and they're wondering, and they've questions in their mind. So now these clients are going to sleep safer at night, you know, because they know that they're less exposed. There is an exposure there, and the exposure might be quite low in the grand scheme of things, but there is an exposure there, and that's why it's important to be proactive and to really get on top of these things, you know, because gold's a safe haven asset, but as we long said, it's only a safe haven if you own it in the safest of ways.
And you have to manage it. You have to manage it as well. It's not something you just fire and forget. You have to keep good company. You've got to hold it with a reputable company. We like to think we're very reputable, and be able to constantly adjust that strategy so it's fit for purpose.
Okay, gents, that's a great note for us to finish up this podcast. Once again, Steve, thank you very much.
No
Mark, thank you very much. Just to remind everybody,
thank you.
Just to remind everybody before we leave, to subscribe to us on iTunes, on YouTube, on SoundCloud. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want, you can sign up for market updates on GoldCore.com. From me, Dave Russell, from Steve Flood and Mark O'Byrne, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Take care, everybody.